The ground trembled faintly as the drills tore deeper into the mineral-rich crust of Tellaric 4. The sound was steady, mechanical, almost comforting, echoing through the cavernous shafts of the mining complex. On the command deck above, Commander Kuravan Rek observed the flow of reports scrolling across translucent holoscreens. Everything was routine. Output was stable. Atmospheric regulators maintained the planet's thin layer of breathable air, and extraction crawlers continued their work without interruption. Tellaric 4 had always been quiet. A neutral world, stripped of strategic value except for its veins of exotic ore used in gravitic propulsion. The Kurtal, with their tall, segmented bodies, ridged mandibles, and shimmering black-blue exoskeletal uniforms, had overseen the site for decades without a single hostile approach. To Rek, stability was the pride of the Kurtal way. Peace here had become so reliable it almost seemed eternal. The operators worked with measured precision. Varnik, young and eager, hunched over his station, pale carapace ridges reflecting the light. Sector 3 output steady, ore refinement at optimal ratios, he reported with mechanical calm. Rek gave a faint nod. Maintain cycle. The Council values consistency more than speed. Silence lingered for a moment. Then came a sharp chime from the long-range sensors. A thin ripple of unease crossed the deck. Rek's secondary eyes flicked to the warning glyphs, flashing crimson. "What is that?" Sile asked, her voice rasping as she leaned across her panel. Her elongated digits tapped rapidly across the controls, drawing up the data. Spikes and jagged fluctuations scrawled across the display. "Gravitational distortion," Varnik muttered, mandibles twitching. He frowned and adjusted the filters. "Probably an error. Satellites misaligned again. Nobody comes here. Who would bother?" Rek stepped closer. The anomaly wasn't noise. It had cadence, weight, like the shadow of something vast pressing through the system. Sile recalibrated. Her wide eyes reflected the glowing script. "That's no error. It's movement. Mass signatures converging." "Impossible," another operator said, voice tight. "This sector is neutral. No one wastes fuel on Tellaric 4. Then the holoscreen flared bright, and silence fell across the command deck. Shapes emerged in sequence, dozens of ships. Their silhouettes were jagged, patchwork vessels pieced together from stolen hulls and scavenged plating. Some bristled with crude spike-like weapons, others dragged tethered wreckage as if it were armor. Symbols painted in raw crimson marked their sides, chaotic, defiant. Recognition rippled instantly through the Kurtal. "The dissidents," Sile whispered, her throat clicking dry. Fear broke across the operators. Why here? What do they gain from this? They can't refine what they steal, can they? Maybe they want prisoners. No, they don't negotiate. They never negotiate. Rek's mandibles locked. He had read the histories, studied the raids. The dissidents were a fractured alliance of castaway species, mercenaries, exiles, and criminals. They thrived on terror, destroying first and looting later. They attacked not for conquest but for spectacle, to remind the galaxy that no one was ever untouchable. "Quiet," Rek snapped, his voice cutting through the panic. "Transmit emergency code 7 to the Prototorate Council, immediately." Sile's claws trembled as she keyed the code. Transmission sent. The room hung in tense silence, the low hum of the life support systems now oppressively loud. All eyes turned to Rek. His armor, ceremonial and old, shimmered faintly under the chamber lights. Decades ago, he had been a strategist in border conflicts, but war had been far from his life on Tellaric 4. Here, he had been an overseer, a guardian of order. Yet he recognized the scent of imminent violence as if it had never left him. Far from Tellaric 4, within the core chambers of the Prototorate Council, the emergency call ignited red across the central display. The council chamber stretched wide, silver walls gleaming under pale artificial light. At its center stood Chancellor Vaylor, a Lethari, whose crystalline frame shimmered like fractured glass. His translucent skull pulsed with internal radiance as he scanned the report. Beside him, leaning casually against the edge of the polished table, was Admiral John Doe. The human's uniform was a stark black cut with silver insignia. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable beneath sharp gray eyes. There was no tension in his posture, no wasted movement. He had been in the chamber discussing patrol deployments, security breaches near contested borders. "Telarik 4, Vela said sharply, voice reverberating. "The dissidents have struck. They move to raid a neutral installation." The chamber filled with murmurs of discontent, counselors questioning whether resources should be diverted to such a backwater. Doe's eyes, however, narrowed slightly as he scanned the data feed. "If you have no objections, we'll take it from here." Valor hesitated, crystalline light flickering uncertainly across his form. The hesitation lasted a breath, then he inclined his head once. "Proceed." Doe turned toward the chief of security at the console. "Notify the commander on Telarik 4, Human Intervention Unit en route. ETA, 14 hours. His tone was final, dismissive of debate. The message surged back across the stars. On Telarik 4, the command deck lights blinked as the response appeared on Rex terminal. No explanation, no elaborate coordination. Human Intervention Unit en route. ETA, 14 hours. Silence crushed the room. Sael's mandibles twitched nervously, her voice breaking. Humans? They're sending humans. Varnick shook his head in disbelief. Why would they? Here of all places. Rex's stare froze on the message. His secondary eyes narrowed, the plates of his face tightening. He knew the stories. He had read the reports other commanders dismissed as exaggerations. His voice rasped low, the sound carrying through the silent chamber. They sent the humans. No one spoke after that. The hum of failing satellites filled the air like the sound of distant drums, steady and inevitable, as if the entire planet knew what those words meant. The countdown glowed across the central display, a relentless string of numbers that refused to bend to hope. 14 hours, no more, no less. Commander Kuravan Rex's gaze locked on the timer, as though his will alone could force it to move faster. Around him, the command deck buzzed with frantic calculations, operators muttering as they tried to make sense of the readings from orbit. "They're shifting formation," Varnick announced, mandibles clattering nervously. "The dissident fleet. They're closing distance fast." Rex's mandibles flexed. "Show me." The holoscreen filled with jagged silhouettes, pirate ships of mismatched design, scavenged from across the galaxy. Some bore insectoid curves of old Cray hulls, others blocky plating from retired Lithari cargo carriers. Painted over every vessel was the same brutal uniform, dark armor streaked with red and bone-white glyphs, a mockery of unity among raiders from a dozen species. Sael's voice trembled. "Why do you look unsettled, Commander? Is it because of the humans? You said it yourself. They're coming. Shouldn't that mean safety?" Rex turned slowly toward her, his eyes narrowing. He didn't snap. His voice was low, deliberate. 10 years ago, on the outer rim of Tharla's edge, an allied fleet of 60 ships stood against a warband twice their size. They were losing, crushed, and then 10 human vessels arrived. Only 10. They didn't negotiate. They didn't posture. They dismantled the warband in less than a day. No survivors. That's what unsettles me, Sael. Because when humans come, the situation has already passed beyond salvation. The words sank like lead. Sael lowered her gaze, mandibles twitching without reply. Rex broke away, moving toward the tactical board. "Divert energy to shield grids covering the habitation sectors. Civilian lives take priority." "Yes, Commander," Varnick answered, claws scraping the controls. An older engineer, Travan, lumbered up from the lower deck, his exoskeleton dull with age. He carried the lines of decades of maintenance on his carapace, his voice grating as he caught Rex's arm. "You're stripping power from the outer sectors. That means we abandon the mines, the comm relays. Rek cut him off. We abandon what can be rebuilt. We protect who cannot. From the opposite console, an engineer named Dara, her carapace smoother and younger than the others, raised her voice. And what of evacuation orders? You're authorizing transports for only 1/3 of the population. Are we now deciding who lives? Her voice cracked with outrage. Rek's mandibles ground together. We don't have the ships for everyone. You know this. The rest must use the subterranean shelters. That's not survival, Dara snapped. That's gambling. Before Rek could answer, the first strike hit. The command deck shuddered violently. Hollow screens flickered. An operator screamed as sparks leapt from an overloaded console. Orbital bombardment, Varnick shouted. They've opened fire! The view feed showed burning streaks cutting through the thin sky. Explosive payloads slammed into the ground near the communication platforms, annihilating towers in clouds of shrapnel and plasma. The transmission network collapsed in seconds. Another impact rocked the base. Mineshaft 4 is gone. Collapsed completely, Sale cried. Civilians trapped below. The sound of muffled detonations rolled across the installation. 3 subterranean modules imploded under direct hits, burying dozens alive. They're not even landing, muttered Core, a technician with rust-brown plating. His voice carried disbelief. They don't need to. They're just dismantling us. Rek barked orders above the chaos. Route survivors to shelters. Keep transports fueled and ready. Prioritize children, medical staff, anyone essential to survival. But panic spread faster than his words. In the hangar bays, families surged toward the few evacuation craft. Some resisted going underground at all, clawing and shouting, terrified of being sealed beneath the earth. Guards tried to hold order but were shoved aside, the crowd fracturing into chaos. On the deck, Sael's eyes widened at her readout. Energy grid collapsing in sectors 6 through 9. Sensors offline. We're blind across half the range. A voice cracked through the channel, distorted by static. This is Transport 3. We've been hit. Hull breach. The line went dead in a burst of white noise. Another strike shook the ground. Lights flickered, dimmed and failed. The evacuation corridors jammed with bodies, operators shouting conflicting orders. Some shouted to flee toward the hangars, others to the bunkers. The air was a wall of confusion and fear. Rex slammed a clawed hand against the terminal. Transmit surrender. All frequencies. Now. Sael obeyed, her hands trembling as she broadcast the plea for ceasefire across every channel. This is Commander Rek of Tellaric 4. We surrender. Ceasefire. We surrender. A second operator, voice cracking with terror, tried to reach the attackers directly. Please, there are children down here. Stop this. The comms only returned static. The only answer was another thunderous strike. An entire storage wing erupted in flames, metal tearing as though ripped by invisible hands. They're ignoring it, Varnick whispered, voice hollow. They won't stop. Rek forced the words out through clenched mandibles. Then we hold what we can. Authorize final evacuation. Only 1/3 will leave. The rest to bunkers. Dara's voice rose again, bitter and furious. You're condemning them, Rek snapped back, his voice hard as steel. I'm saving who I can. The deck shook again, alarms wailing, flames licking along the far corridor. Rek's hands hovered over the failing holomap, his chest tightening under the weight of every impossible choice. Above, in orbit, the dissident fleet circled like vultures, merciless and patient, raining fire without a thought of honor or restraint. And below, on Tellaric 4, the Kurtal fell into disarray, their world collapsing into dust and flame, while the countdown to human arrival ticked on, uncaring and steady. The bombardment finally slowed, leaving behind only the dull roar of collapsing structures and the distant hiss of burning fields. For 14 relentless hours, Tellaric 4 had endured the dissidents' orbital fury. Entire districts were reduced to fractured stone and twisted metal. Families were scattered across shattered bunkers, the air thick with dust and the acrid sting of scorched minerals. On the command deck, Commander Kuravan Rek stood rigid, his armor cracked from falling debris, his mandibles drawn tight in silence. Operators clung to their stations, exhaustion in every movement. The countdown had reached its end, and still no salvation had arrived. Above, the pirate fleet shifted formation, preparing for the final descent. "They're sending down scouts," Varnik reported, his voice hoarse. "Small crafts, mapping and marking sectors." Through the fractured displays, streaks of fire traced the sky as raider shuttles plunged toward the surface. The hulls were jagged and grotesque, painted in the crude sigils of the dissident alliance. Inside, crews of mixed origin jeered and argued, their common language little more than curses and boasts. One pirate officer, a hulking reptilian with scaled armor plates fused into his skin, growled over the comm. "No resistance left. Just plant the flag and strip what we can." Laughter answered him, harsh and guttural. Another voice, higher, rasping, insectoid in tone, snapped back. "Don't get comfortable. Strip them first, then laugh." The Kurtal on the command deck listened to the intercepted chatter, mandibles trembling with despair. "It's over. They'll occupy us within the hour." Rek gave no reply. His eyes stayed on the tactical readout, the orbit above still crowded with predatory silhouettes. Then, without warning, the displays flashed. 3 new signatures erupted into existence, silent, sudden, impossible to track until they were already there. The Kurtal operators recoiled as the reading stabilized. "They just appeared," Varnik stammered. On the main screen, 3 vessels cut across the darkness. Smooth, angular hulls, edges too precise, surfaces dark as if swallowing starlight itself. No insignias, no banners, no signal transmissions. They had bypassed the entire dissident blockade as though it hadn't existed. Sale's voice broke in a whisper. "Why don't they say anything? Not even an identification code?" In orbit, the pirates scrambled to understand. "Where did they come from?" a raider barked. "Check the drives. Scan for gravitic signatures." "There's nothing. No emissions. No heat trails. It's like they weren't even moving. There's no thermal, no impulse. It looks like those ships are empty." The 3 human vessels moved with eerie calm, gliding through the pirate formation. None of the raiders fired. None dared. The ships passed so close to dissident hulls that alarms screamed across pirate decks. Yet the humans left no wake, no detectable disruption. It was as though shadows had slipped through metal and fire without touching either. On Telluric 4, Rek watched the screens in silence. The human ships descended into the planet's ravaged atmosphere, cutting through the choking haze of dust and burning fuel. They made no announcement, no request for coordination, no explanation. They simply landed on the ruins of the bombardment zone, their hulls gleaming with cold precision as they settled into the ash. The base fell silent. No operator spoke. The hum of damaged consoles seemed suddenly louder, before fading into a stillness that pressed against the ears. Even the flames outside seemed to crackle quieter. Why do they not move? Why does nothing happen? The pirate fleet above watched too, unease spreading through their ranks. They don't even open their hatches. Maybe they're unmanned. Then why can't I scan through their hulls? The silence stretched. Dust drifted lazily across the scorched plain, coating the human ships in gray as though the world itself tried to conceal them. On the Kurtal command deck, Rek leaned forward, mandibles tight, voice barely audible. 3 minutes. Every operator froze at the words. They didn't know what he meant, but the weight of his tone pressed down heavier than the bombardments ever had. In orbit, pirate commanders barked for answers, their voices clashing across open channels. The humans remained mute. No signals, no lights, no sound. It was as if the entire system had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable but unseen. The Kurtal felt it in their bones. The pirates felt it too, though none dared say it aloud. And on the scorched surface of Telluric 4, 3 silent human ships waited, motionless, as if the storm had only just begun. The third minute passed, and the command deck of Tellaric 4 plunged into an oppressive silence. The operators stared at their consoles in disbelief. Where moments before the displays had shown the scarred plains and ash of the bombardment zones, now they showed only static, blank haze, or lines of data that contradicted themselves. "Surface feeds are gone," Sale reported, her voice dry and brittle. "Every probe, every drone, it's all gone." Rek leaned close to the master console, eyes scanning the void of information. His mandibles clicked once in restrained fury. "Cycle the spectrum. Thermal, magnetic, gravitics. Push through." Jarek, a younger technician with a streak of copper along his plated chest, obeyed, his claws darting over the panel. He froze as the readout stabilized into a meaningless distortion of jagged waves and pulses. His throat vibrated as he forced the words out. "It's not interference. It's like the entire surface just turned into a mirror. Nothing leaves. Nothing enters." The deck filled with staccato fragments of speech, voices overlapping but never resolving into answers. "I can't get heat returns. Magnetic fields are folding in on themselves. Subsurface imaging is blank like it was never there." All that remained were erratic bursts, muffled, rhythmic pulses that didn't align with any known frequency, gravitational spikes that surged and then collapsed as though mocking their instruments. The voices of the operators faltered, dropping lower with each attempt. They glanced at one another, wide-eyed, until even the whispers felt dangerous. "Don't speak too loud. It feels like it's listening." As if on cue, glyphs flared red along the perimeter screens. The base's network stuttered. Maintenance automatons froze mid-motion in the corridors below, loaders locked in place, and defensive drones winked offline one after another. Their signals vanished from the grid as though erased, leaving nothing but silence. Varnick turned sharply, mandibles twitching. All automatons not responding. Their cores are still powered, but there's no relay. It's like their minds have been cut out. Rex said nothing. His hands gripped the railing of the command deck, knuckles pressing into the alloy until it creaked. Every system meant to give him sight, and control was falling dark. And worse than the loss itself was the certainty that none of it had failed by accident. Far above, on the bridge of the dissident flagship Bloodcarver, the raider leader snarled at his trembling officers. Korak was massive, a mammalian brute whose scarred snout jutted forward beneath iron-plated ridges. His armor was a patchwork of scavenged plates bolted into his flesh. He towered over the bridge table, fists slamming against the holo display. "What do you mean the surface has gone black?" he roared. The avian officer at the console, thin, feathers stripped ragged by age, tapped frantically across the failing screens. No return from the scouts. They crossed atmosphere and then silence. No fire, no debris, just gone. "Then send more," Korak growled. "Double the patrols. I want to see what is happening down there. Move." Two smaller frigates broke from the formation, engines flaring red as they plunged toward the planet's upper air. On dissident bridges, officers jeered and barked, trying to bury unease with noise. The frigates cut through the haze of Tellaric 4's atmosphere. For 3 breaths, their signals held steady. Then, mid-descent, they winked out. No flash, no wreckage, no screams. One moment present, the next erased. On the Bloodcarver, silence spread like disease. The avian officer's claws shook against the console. "Commander, they're gone. Not destroyed. Just gone." A reptilian officer with scales like oil turned toward Korak, his voice taut. "This defies every pattern we know. We can't chart what we can't see. Every measurement collapses." Korak's snout curled in a snarl, but doubt flickered in his bloodshot eyes. "Cowards. It's interference. A trick." Another 2 raider ships descended. They too vanished without trace. The bridge crew began to whisper among themselves. Suspicion cut through their ranks sharper than fear. Some muttered about sabotage, others about curses. Orders were repeated, questioned, contradicted. The rigid hierarchy that held their fractured alliance together bent under invisible weight. Back on Telarik 4, the Kurtal operators stared at their empty screens, mandibles clicking in frantic rhythm. Sile's voice quivered. They're disappearing, just like our drones. Jarek tried again, slamming commands into his panel. Nothing. No return. No logic. He pulled his claws back as though the console itself had turned hostile. Rek finally spoke, voice low and heavy. The surface is no longer ours. Stop trying to look. Stop trying to listen. His words hung over the deck like a shroud. None of the operators dared disobey. They leaned back from their stations, heads lowering, as if submission to silence might keep them alive. The only sounds now were the faint hum of life support and the distorted pulses on the screens. The pulses came irregular, broken, as though some vast hidden rhythm beat just beyond their comprehension. Each spike pressed down like a weight on the chest, each lull dragged into silence thick enough to smother. Above, on the pirate ships, voices turned sharper, more frantic. Where are they? Why don't we see anything? Why would a planet go dark like this? What kind of weapon erases signals? What if it isn't a weapon? Korak struck him with a backhand that split the alien's jaw, but even as blood spread across the deck, the whispers didn't stop. They had all seen the same truth. The ships had not been destroyed. They had been swallowed. On the Kurtal base, every operator had stopped speaking altogether. Some pressed their mandibles shut with their own hands. Others simply lowered their heads as if bowing to the inevitable. Rek stood tall, eyes unblinking, hands still locked on the railing. For the first time in his long career, he gave no orders, because there were none left to give. The instruments continued to hum, breaking into static bursts, falling silent, then humming again. Each sound was stranger than the last, as though the world outside the base was no longer the same one they had known. And in that silence, the galaxy held its breath, while 3 human ships sat on the surface unseen, their presence twisting reality itself into something no Kurtal or dissident could comprehend. Static filled the Kurtal command deck, an oppressive hum that crawled into every crevice of the chamber. Operators leaned close to their consoles, trying to make sense of the fragments still slipping through. The sensors had lost the surface, but the radars above continued transmitting, shouts, panic, abrupt cuts that sent cold chills through everyone listening. Kreshtal, it's fragmenting. A dissident voice cracked over open channels, the words drenched in terror before the transmission collapsed into static. Another followed, jagged and raw. We can't get contact with the ground. Something is... The line dissolved mid-word, a shrill burst of broken sound hanging in the air long after the speaker was gone. On the Kurtal deck, Varnik pressed his claws into his panel, mandibles trembling. These signatures, they're appearing and disappearing outside the axis. It breaks all logic of navigation. Flashes bloomed across the orbital feed. Distorted light bent like liquid, streaks of impossible color warping in arcs that defied physics. For a heartbeat, the silhouette of a pirate frigate appeared twisted, stretched as if pulled through invisible strands. Then it vanished. As the light twisted, the image on the feed glitched, frames freezing on the outline of a dissident crew clawing at their panels, faces contorted in panic as if they sensed something crawling inside the ship. The entire silhouette warped, breaking apart along lines that didn't exist a moment before. Then the ship vanished, leaving only a fading afterimage on the sensors. On another screen, a radar cruiser convulsed, its hull cracking along lines that hadn't been struck. It split open silently, fragments folding into each other before scattering into drifting shards. The Kurtal stared. This isn't war. Above Telarik 4, inside the blood carver, Korak's face twisted into rage as his officers crumbled around him. The reptilian helmsman clutched his chair, scales glistening with sweat. "They're here. They're here inside the hull." The comm cut into an ear-splitting shriek, then silence. "They're watching us before we can—" His words cut, replaced by a strange distortion, a layered echo, as though a dozen voices tried to speak through him, failing. The sound dissolved into a low, grinding static that lingered, carrying no meaning, only dread. On the Kurtal base, Rek's mandibles locked. His gaze never left the chaotic streams. Operators huddled at their stations, muttering in hushed tones. "They're inside, here with us." The scream ended. Nothing followed. Across the dissident formation, ships broke apart, not from enemy fire, but from within. Shadows moved across their hulls, stretching unnaturally, bending light like water around invisible shapes. Some vessels simply drifted, systems dead, crews lifeless, yet their hulls untouched. Others ignited from within, bright against the black before tearing themselves apart. A raider corvette jolted free of formation, engines flaring. "Retreat! Retreat!" its commander bellowed across channels. Seconds later, its hull twisted violently, the ship turning against itself before detonating into silent shards. Others followed suit. Some fled in every direction, scattering the once proud formation into chaos. A few self-destructed rather than wait for the unseen fate that consumed their comrades. The Kurtal command deck was frozen in horror. Varnik's claws hovered above his console, unwilling to touch it. Sile stared at the silent void where the pirate fleet had been, mandibles quivering. Rek leaned forward, forcing a transmission across a secured channel. His voice was steady, though his chest tightened. "This is Commander Rek of Talarik 4. Human forces. Do you hear me? Do you coordinate?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then a single line of text scrolled across the Kurtal console. "Secure zone. Situation resolved." The words cut sharper than any explosion. "That's it? That's all." The sensors pulsed one last time before falling silent. 8 seconds before the final pirate transmission, every remaining dissident ship winked off the readings. No debris. No fading trails. Only emptiness where once an armada had hung. Rek stood motionless, eyes fixed on the message. 14 minutes of combat had undone an entire force. He had seen wars that lasted years, battles measured in oceans of blood. This was something else. And in the silence that followed, the base felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the entire world understood it had witnessed something that could not be named. The silence after the last pirate transmission was suffocating. The Kurtal command deck, once a storm of alarms and desperate chatter, now felt like a tomb. Operators sat rigid at their stations, waiting for something, anything, to confirm what they had just witnessed. No explosions, no debris, just absence. Commander Kurvan Rek finally broke the paralysis. "Pull the recordings," he ordered, his voice steady though every syllable weighed with exhaustion. "Everything from the last hour. I want every frame, every echo." The technicians obeyed, dragging corrupted files and fractured telemetry across the screens. Lines of distorted data scrolled past in unreadable waves. Video feeds collapsed into static or bled into light smears where the pirates should have been. Audio channels carried nothing but low-frequency rumbling, as if the machines themselves struggled to describe what they had sensed. Jarek, the younger technician, slammed his claws against the panel in frustration. "This is useless. The sensors were blind. We caught nothing real." Another voice cut in. Dravem, one of the base's senior scientists, with his long gray ridges and weathered carapace. He leaned over the console, mandibles flexing. "No, not blind. Look at this." He magnified a section of data. The screen filled with jagged distortions, gravitational signatures twisting in and out of existence. "These patterns, they don't match any weapons we know. They don't even behave like combat." Sael tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Then what do they behave like?" Dravam hesitated, mandibles twitching. Like execution. Target by target. Clean. No waste. A second scientist, Coral, snapped at him, his voice tight with restrained fury. Execution? That implies control. Do you see control here? He jabbed a claw toward the display. This is chaos. It makes no sense. Fields folding against themselves. Signatures vanishing mid-read. This isn't war, but it isn't execution either. It's madness. Madness doesn't leave results this precise, Dravam shot back. The fleet is gone. Not broken. Not scattered. Gone. That is intent. The two glared across the table, their mandibles grinding audibly. Around them, the operators shifted uncomfortably. The argument was less about truth and more about the unbearable insult of not knowing. Rex stood apart, arms folded behind his back, gaze fixed on the mess of projections. He let the debate rage without stepping in. There was nothing to add. Jarek tried to intervene, running another simulation. He overlaid trajectories, projected energy dispersals, and extrapolated attack vectors. Each calculation ended in the same way. Impossible readings, algorithms looping endlessly before collapsing. It should show collisions, ruptures, heat signatures, something. Instead, he gestured helplessly at the display, where the projection dissolved into meaningless static. Instead, we get this. Dravam leaned closer, narrowing his secondary eyes. Reverse it. Analyze the gravitational shear backwards. Jarek did. The results came back jagged, inverted. The signatures moved as though each spike pulled inward, collapsing space itself around microscopic points. Coral recoiled, mandibles flaring. That's a reversed field. That shouldn't even exist. Yet it does, Dravam said flatly. The room filled with angry mutters. Some scientists hissed in denial. Others argued furiously, their claws stabbing the displays as though force alone might conjure sense from the chaos. Then the automatons. They stopped because their relays couldn't process this. The signatures were inverted against their own cause. Coral bared his teeth. Don't you hear yourself? You're suggesting humans field technology that reverses gravitic laws at will. If that were true, we wouldn't be alive to argue. Maybe we're not the targets, Dravam countered. His voice dropped low. Maybe they let us live. That's worse. The deck fell silent at that, the weight of his words pressing harder than the data on the screens. Rek remained still. His eyes followed the corrupted telemetry, the broken strings of numbers and jagged lines. He didn't try to decipher them. He didn't join the argument. He simply watched as the brightest minds of Tellaric 4 clawed at fragments they could not comprehend, their fury rising not from fear, but from insult, because the evidence mocked them, dangling the truth just beyond reach. No human had been seen, no weapon identified, no maneuver recorded. All that remained were distorted gravitational echoes, collapsed signatures, and drones that no longer existed in any known database. And in that absence, Rek understood what none of them would say aloud. They hadn't witnessed a battle. They had only been left with the result. 2 days after the silence of Tellaric 4, Commander Kurvan Rek walked through the immense halls of the Galactic Council station. The corridors leading to the central chamber were lined with cold metal and pale light, each step carrying him closer to the judgment seat of civilizations. He had faced annihilation, but the weight of this march pressed heavier on his chest. The doors to the council chamber opened without sound. The air inside was sharp, clinical. The room stretched wide in a perfect circle, tiers rising like steps of judgment. Above them, light filtered through crystalline grids, erasing every shadow. It was a place without color, without warmth, designed to strip away comfort and leave only truth. Rek entered alone, his ceremonial armor still bearing scars from Tellaric 4. His chest plate was dented, his pauldrons blackened from heat, the sigil of his people dulled by smoke. He had not asked for it to be repaired. Let them see. He reached the center dais, a small platform at the heart of the circle. Around him, The representatives of the great species leaned forward in silence. Dozens of eyes, lenses, and sensors bore down on him. None blinked. None spoke. The chamber pulsed with stillness. The terminal before him glowed, awaiting input. Rek placed his hands behind his back, mandibles pressed together in rigid composure. From the highest tier, Councillor Malarath spoke. He was a saurian of immense stature, scales ridged like stone, his robes heavy with the markings of age and power. His voice, deep and edged, cut across the hall. Commander Kuravan Rek of Telerik IV. You are summoned before this body to deliver your statement and to provide the official records concerning the events that transpired on your world. Place them before the council now. The words rang against the walls. For several breaths, no one else moved. The chamber's silence sharpened, each representative waiting for his compliance. Rek slowly reached into the compartment at his side. His claws closed around the data core, crystalline, faceted, its inner glow flickering faintly with residual energy. He drew it out with deliberate slowness and set it upon the terminal. The sound of crystal touching alloy echoed like a thunderclap in the sterile chamber. You may open it, Rek said, his voice level, his tone almost weary. But I would not recommend it. A ripple moved across the tiers. Murmurs spread, low and sharp. Some representatives turned to their aides, whispering furiously. Others glanced at one another, their expressions betraying unease, curiosity, or veiled fear. A few raised their devices to capture the moment, recording it for archives that none might dare review later. From a lower tier, Councillor Turnvey leaned forward. Encased in a skeletal exosuit that whirred with every motion, his thin frame seemed swallowed by the machinery. His voice, metallic and stripped of tone, carried an artificial authority. Commander Rek, your hesitation verges on obstruction. This council does not indulge in riddles. Do you intend to refuse cooperation with the collective will? Rek raised his eyes to meet the cold glint of Vey's. His mandibles clicked once, sharp, before he answered. I do not refuse. I do not obstruct. I witnessed it. His words carried heavy, not with anger but with certainty. And what I witnessed is not a record you wish to examine. The murmurs rose again, sharper this time. A chorus of whispers filled the chamber, the tension spreading like static. Malarath slammed his clawed hand against the railing before him, the crack reverberating through the chamber. The voices died instantly. His reptilian gaze locked onto Rek. Then speak, Commander. If not through record, then through testimony. What was it you saw? The question hung in the light-filled void. Rek stood taller, drawing in a breath that seemed to scrape through his chest. He let the silence stretch until it pressed against every ear in the chamber. It was not a battle. His mandibles flexed, his voice unshaken. It was a demonstration, a message. He paused, letting the words cut into the stillness. A message to the universe. The chamber fell silent again, but the silence was no longer empty. It was weighted, suffocating. The representatives did not shift. Their gazes locked on him, frozen between disbelief and dread. On the lower tier, a young councillor stirred. His skin was copper-hued, his eyes bright with the impatience of youth. He rose halfway from his seat, as though to challenge the testimony. His mouth opened, but before sound could form, Malarath raised his claw again. Record closed, Malarath declared, his voice carrying the finality of a blade. The official transcriber, seated at the periphery, sealed the session with a single keystroke. The lights above shifted subtly, marking the conclusion. No objections, no inquiries, no motions filed. The silence afterward stretched unnaturally long. It pressed against every representative, forcing them to confront the weight of what had been said and what had been left unsaid. Each second dragged until it became unbearable, yet none dared break it. Rek remained at the center, unmoving. His gaze swept the tiers, lingering on the still figures watching him. Their eyes betrayed nothing. Their hands did not move toward the core. None leaned forward. None dared touch it. At last, Rek turned. His boots struck the flawless floor in steady rhythm as he walked back toward the towering doors. Each step echoed, cutting into the silence like a drumbeat. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back one final time. The representatives remained seated, their figures etched in uniform light, as if carved from stone. The crystalline data core still sat upon the terminal, untouched, glowing faintly like an ember in the cold. Rek's mandibles shifted once, the faintest trace of contempt or perhaps sorrow crossing his features. He said nothing. The doors slid shut behind him, sealing the chamber in its sterile brilliance. Inside, the council remained frozen. No representative reached for the core. No aide moved to retrieve it. No one dared approach the terminal. The device sat alone in the center of the galaxy's highest authority, glowing softly. And no one touched it. A week after Rek's testimony, Talaric 4 sat in space like a scar no one dared to touch. Its orbit was quiet, its surface still marked by the impact craters of the pirate bombardment, yet no ship crossed its boundary. Probes from neighboring systems crept to the edge of its gravity well, scanned the silence, and fled. Recon drones pinged coordinates, sent home incomplete packets of distorted readings, and vanished from charts as quickly as they had arrived. None entered the atmosphere. None ventured closer than the line invisible, yet absolute, where the human ships had once descended. The absence of official decrees did not matter. Trade guilds rerouted entire lanes overnight. Freighters plotted wider orbits around the neutral zone, even if it cost them weeks. Cartographers redrew maps, leaving Talaric 4 encircled in cautionary symbols. Not a blockade, not a sanction, just avoidance. Fear disguised as consensus. On the outer rim of Ostan territory, inside a War Command outpost, the chamber glowed with the shifting light of a tactical holomap. Stars glittered across its projection, strings of trade and defense weaving like threads. In the center, Talaric 4 pulsed crimson, marked as hazard. General Skovash stood over it, his exoskeletal mandibles flexing as he leaned closer. His armored frame cast a jagged outline in the sterile light. Around him, his staff officers watched without a word. The general's gaze lingered on the red marking for several seconds before he finally spoke. "Better not touch it," he muttered, his gravel voice low and decisive. No one disagreed. Orders were drawn up immediately to reroute Ostan patrols. A proposed shipping lane through the sector was abandoned before it even reached the Emperor's desk. Not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, but because every officer in the room understood that the risk was not worth testing. Word spread the way such things always did, not through proclamations, but through silence. Captains passed warnings to their crews without notes. Merchants whispered in port halls, and strategists wrote lines on maps in red, never explaining, but never questioned. And then came the memorandum. It did not arrive through the council. It had no crest, no seal, no official sender. Yet it circulated through the hidden channels of military networks, passed between high commands like contraband. The file was simple, no attachments, no lengthy preamble. Talaric 4. Do not send humans unless you intend to end everything. No government demanded its unsealing. No counselor argued for transparency. Analysts who might have dissected it never did. The file sat untouched in secure vaults across the stars. Everyone who saw it already understood enough. Elsewhere, in the deep black of space, a human station orbited a barren world. It bore no insignia, no signal beacon. Its hull blended into the void, painted in matte black plating that bled into darkness. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the hum of systems and the glow of cascading data. In an operations chamber, two officers sat across from one another, bathed in the pale flicker of screens. Their faces were calm, composed, too composed for men who had overseen the erasure of an entire fleet. Major Elias Cade leaned back, hands clasped behind his head, as if the weight of the galaxy's fear meant nothing to him. 14 minutes, he said flatly. Autonomous protocols executed without deviation. Orbital sweep, subterranean sweep, atmospheric coverage, all synchronized. Zero malfunctions. Lieutenant Marcus Hale tapped through his own console, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. Civilian population intact. Dissident fleet eliminated. No trace left outside controlled gravitational noise. Not a single manned shot fired. He dragged a finger down the final report. All objectives met. Cade looked at him across the table. Their expressions didn't change. There was no pride, no triumph, only routine acknowledgement. The door to the chamber slid open. Admiral John Doe stepped inside. He carried no theatrics, no stern glare. His presence alone brought both men to their feet. They snapped into salute, chairs scraping back. The Admiral gave a single nod, his gaze sweeping across the monitors. His voice was calm, measured. Good. Now they understand we're serious. Continue. He turned without ceremony, boots clicking once against the floor before the door sealed behind him. Silence filled the room again. Cade eased back into his chair, his tone still flat as he keyed into the comms system. Field report transmitted to Central Command, logged under routine operations. The classification appeared in green across the display. Routine. The file disappeared into streams of endless military traffic, indistinguishable from thousands of other mission reports. Hale rubbed at his eyes and shut down a secondary console. Let's get some coffee. This mission damn near put me to sleep. Cade allowed himself a dry smile. Mission complete without leaving the chair. Beats bleeding for it. Yeah. Hale stood, stretching. Better like this. We've buried enough with action. The screens dimmed to standby, the hum of the station steady and indifferent. Outside, the facility floated unnoticed, faceless among the stars. No banners marked it. No alien sensor dared seek it. And in silence, Telluric 4 remained, unmarked, untaken, untouched. A scar on the star charts, a whispered warning etched across the galaxy. For the humans, it was finished. A routine assignment, closed and forgotten. For everyone else, it was a shadow that would never lift. Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Hope you had a great time with the story. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really makes a huge difference to the channel. And hey, I've got something else for you. I've chosen another story that I think you'll really enjoy. Just click the card right here, or hit this one to jump into the full playlist. See you in the next one.